Good morning. Welcome to the 12th meeting of the committee in 2014. Can I remind everyone to switch off mobile phones and other electronic equipment as they affect the broadcasting system? Some committee members may consult tablets during the meeting. This is because we provide meeting papers in digital format. Agenda item 1 today is an oral evidence session on our inquiry into the flexibility and autonomy of local government in Scotland. There's one last-minute change to the published agenda. Sue Bruce of Edinburgh City Council cannot be with us today. We understand the reasons why. We would welcome it if we had a written submission from Sue, if that's possible, and I'm sure you can pass that on. I'd like to welcome to our panel this morning Hugh Dunn, Corporate Finance Manager for the City of Edinburgh Council, who is thankfully stood in for Sue at the last minute, Steve Grimmond, Chief Executive of Fife Council, and Sally Loudon, Chief Executive of Argyll and Bute Council. Welcome and good morning. Would you like to make any opening statements?
No, there's no introductory statement.
Okay. Mr Dunn?
Just to express Sue's apologies to the committee. I know you understand the reasons, but she just wanted me to convey them personally to the committee.
Thank you very much. That's much appreciated. You may well be aware already that some members of the committee have been in Europe for a few days to look at local government elsewhere, and in particular, we were struck by the turnouts that there are in local council elections in other parts of Europe. And we're really interested in community engagement. And I wonder if you could give us an indication of how your councils engage with communities, what can be done to improve that engagement, and what you think can be done to boost turnout in local government elections here in Scotland. Ms Loudon, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. We do a range of things in relation to community engagement. We've got an overall community engagement strategy which has a number of tools within that as well, not only for the local authority, community planning partnership, but for groups themselves in the community to use in engaging with communities on specific issues. If I can take it at a number of different levels, for our services, they routinely engage with service user groups. They'll routinely engage with specific groups, such as homelessness people, etc., to find out the specific issues that they have in accessing our services. If we're planning any significant changes in terms of service delivery, then we'll do a number of things, including setting up focus groups for that specific service, doing surveys, etc. At a corporate level or a community planning level, we do a significant amount of engagement in terms of the development of things such as our single outcome agreement, where we'll use a citizens panel, we will go out and speak to community groups, we'll do online surveys, but we also engage the third sector to go out and speak to harder to reach groups for us, and that can go down to individuals, and I think the last consultation that we did, there was over about 200 to 300 responses that we got from harder to reach groups. We also have a community capacity team that help communities develop as well. So they're the ones that are responsible for delivering the community engagement strategy, and they have things like a community resources toolkit, which is a significant document which lays out different ways of engaging with communities, but also has some resources behind it, such as things that we've found that work pretty well around a tent where people come to give their views on things, and various other tools and techniques that can be used. We've also done a fair amount of work in supporting groups to develop projects themselves. Things like South Kintyre Development Trust, where they are acquiring under our asset transfer process one of our buildings in Campbelltown. So this team will help groups such as them to look at funding, to look at how they set themselves up as groups, how they constitute themselves, etc., etc. Our turnout at local government elections was in the late 40%, and it varies across each of the different wards that we have. We've got a communication strategy on the back of any election to try and encourage people to vote. We've just engaged as well with the Electoral Registration Office, and we've put some money into seeing if we can do this better and promote a better turnout at elections. So hopefully that gives you a flavour, convener and members, around what we've put in place in Argyll and Bute.
Thank you. Before I move on to the other panellists, you talked of harder to reach groups. You have a number of island communities in Argyll and Bute. Is it often more difficult to communicate with them? Do they feel that they are listened to? What special things do you put in place to help island communities engage?
Yeah, a lot of our islands are very different. Some of them are very active and very engaged, and they come knocking on our doors for support. There are other island communities excuse me, where we will encourage them to engage. And part of what we talked about in terms of the harder to reach groups, the third sector do some specific work on islands for us. But also, if we've put in place a significant a corporate communications or engagement event, then we will do some specific events around islands, and a lot of that can be conducted by VC.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grimmond, please.
Thanks very much. There's a number of similarities to the kind of multiple channels that Sally has mentioned, but to kind of briefly run through some of those from a Fife perspective. We've got a significant commitment to a decentralised approach, partly because of the scale and geography of Fife, which focuses on 7 area committees within Fife, which have a committee of elected members, also have a focused area management team that is there to both ensure a degree of engagement with those more localised communities, as well as a coordination across services. And those constructs also have a focus on the development of local community planning and engagement around the wider basket of public services at that area. In terms of the kind of multiple channels that we would utilise to engage with communities, there's a range of things, from a range of evidence gathering at service level, but also through a significant people's panel in Fife, which has over 3,000 members. We have a significant exercise which is becoming more of a continuous engagement with communities around the budget setting in Fife, but is ostensibly about setting priorities in the region. And that's done through a range of media, from a range of kind of roadshow engagements with communities across Fife, allowing an opportunity to input to an understanding of the various choices that need to be made, using online media, and increasingly social media is a route that we've begun to utilise to try and engage with the community in different ways, including kind of live engagements through Facebook and webinars with communities of interest and local communities on a kind of live interactive basis, so we're getting feedback on particular issues which can then help inform the definition of policy and delivery. Like Sally, we've got a significant commitment to community capacity building through the area management teams that are set up in our 7 areas that seek to provide opportunities to build the capacity in local communities to better enable engagement, particularly in areas of greater inequality, where the potential for engagement is less to begin with. I think there's a significant focus increasingly on a kind of place-based approach as well, which both recognises the continuing strength of local elected member surgeries as a direct means of engaging with local communities, but alongside that looks at the broader establishment of regular engagement around kind of local community issues. And we've developed some work with Police Scotland around enhanced community engagement meetings, which kind of started from an interest and a focus on community safety, but have broadened into a regular opportunity for very localised communities to come together and both ask a range of questions of a wide range of public sector partners at the local level, and also gain information on different approaches to local delivery. We have piloted further approaches. We've done one or two attempts at community budgeting, where we've engaged very directly with local communities on elements of local authority funding, which are then deployed against the priorities that are developed and defined by the communities directly themselves. We also have examples of supporting the development of community trusts and local assets being transferred into to local ownership as a means of more direct engagement. Probably finally, through the devolution of budgets to the area level, provide again another opportunity for a more direct engagement at that level with local communities on the priorities that they would seek to set. In terms of election turnout, our turnout again has generally been in the high 40% level in recent years. Like Sally, there's a range of communication strategies to raise awareness of forthcoming elections and provide information through a range of media. Probably one of the areas that we've sought to look at is engagement of young people, and I suppose a wider approach that looks at the development of political literacy through the education system in terms of raising awareness of the elections and the potential and interest in getting involved in that. And that's perhaps a kind of longer term strategy which has yet to see much effect in terms of growing turnout.
Thank you. You've talked about the area committees and some of the engagement that there has been in terms of budgeting in local areas. How much community involvement is there in terms of the day-to-day aspects of those area committees?
I suppose at one level the area committees are public committees and have a responsibility both to scrutinise the delivery of local services and also direct the way in which those local services are delivered. So the broad approach of the area committees is to provide a broad platform for local engagement and local information about service delivery. Although in terms of direct involvement of the wider public in those committees, they are open to the public, but there's probably limited levels of turnout at the area committee meetings themselves.
You, Mr Dunn, please.
I recognise a lot of what Sally and Steve have already said regarding community capacity, place, community planning, etc. Maybe from a finance angle, I can maybe give some examples of what we've tried to do in Edinburgh to get more consultation, more community involvement in the budget. In Edinburgh, what we tend to do now in the last couple of years is get the budget out for consultation. So last year we got the budget out for consultation in end of September. And the idea was that to have a 3-month consultation period running to Christmas, and then we look at the various questions, queries, responses we receive, and then that is taken into consideration when the actual budget motion goes to committee, and that's usually available a week before the committee. So what we're trying to do is show to people the proposals go out as consultation. That won't be the final budget. Each year there's examples of questions coming in, queries, responses from constituents, the general public on issues, and as a result of that the administration have made changes to the budget. So that is one way. We've actually increased involvement now to 3 months consultation and then a month to consider these queries, and then the actual budget motion is given a week in advance. So that's kind of area we're trying to get more involvement with the public. We're looking at ways that we can increase that, maybe going into schools with budgets as a kind of budget game sort of thing. We've seen other councils have done. I think Liverpool have done a game looking at here's your budget, what would you do with the services, what would you reduce. So it's just trying to get involvement of different areas of the budget. We've also looked at maybe older people, where we take the budget to engage with them. So these are areas, it's actually a plan of action. We've came a long way in getting the budget out of consultation 3 months early, but it's how we then engage with other people and do show to people that as a result of you coming involved in the budget process, you did change the decisions that might have been made at the council meeting in February. So that's a kind of area of consultation with the public we've tried to take forward. Regarding turnout in elections, I think we're very similar to the kind of 40% levels that Steve and Sally have set out for Edinburgh. So well, I think we're all round about the same level as far as participation at local elections.
You mentioned community planning there. How much involvement is there in community planning from members of the public? Are there members of the public on the board of the community planning partnership in your area, or at what level is the input of members of the public? Mr Dunn, if you would like to go first.
Maybe let the other ones, I'll just think about that.
Okay. Ms Loudon.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. But can I also expand on my original answer as well? Is that
Sure.
okay? Just picking up on some of the things that Steve and Hugh were saying. We've also got local area committees. We're administratively split into 4 areas, and we've also got area community planning, local area community planning groups, which is the local authority, all our community planning partners, the community councils as well. And in some areas, the community councils bring themselves together and then only put a few reps onto the local area community planning group. So the community is represented through the community councils, but also the local area community planning groups are open to the wider public. Just picking up on things in terms of the budget consultation, we do that on a community planning basis as well. So we'll go out and do roadshows, and it's not just the local authority, it's our community planning partners that go out in the roadshows. So it's one budget, public sector budget, is discussed with communities. In terms of direct public involvement in community planning groups and local area committees, what we find is if there's something particularly controversial, that's where communities will come out, and it's usually around planning issues. If there's a hearing that we're holding on planning, we'll go to the local area, and that's the type of thing that will bring our communities out to express their views. The other thing, just to pick up on what Steve was saying of a place-based approach, one of the things that we've started to put in place is recognising that economic regeneration is a significant issue for my council in my area. We've got an economic development action plan, but we're now doing that on a local basis as well. So we've developed local economic development action plans because of the place-based approach. And if I could give you one example of where I think community consultation has worked well, we've just put in place an integrated children's services plan. So it's a multi-agency plan, and we went out to consultation to include, the consultation included nursery children, where nursery teachers were sitting down and asking the nursery kids in an appropriate way what the issues for them were and what they wanted to see in the plan. Every school child was given information on the plan, and it went to parents, went to all our partners, etc. And there was a wealth of information that came back that is now included in the plan. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more information.
And are there any members of the public in the board of the Community Planning Partnership?
Not directly on the Community Planning Board. The Community Council and Third Sector are represented on the board, but not individual members of the public.
Thank you. Mr Grimmond.
I think there's a way to go in terms of public direct involvement in community planning. In Fife, the Community Planning Partnership does not have a representative of the local community sitting on the board. It is effectively representatives of the public and third sector agencies that come together at the Community Planning Partnership. Where we are developing work, and it's in part recognising, I think, the issue of how you properly engage communities in community planning, is to establish, through the decentralised 7-area construct that I mentioned in my earlier answer, a focus on local community planning at that level, and each of those areas is in the process of developing a local community plan. And that it's at that level that I think there is the genuine prospect of more real engagement with local communities around the development of that plan, which I suppose in shorthand should be an articulation of the priorities within a place or a local community. And the framework that we are developing would see those local community plans both articulating those local priorities and then informing and in a kind of bottom-up way seeking to influence the community planning partnership at a Fife-wide level and the public sector agencies that sit at that partnership in the way that they direct their resources and priorities. So that's the model we're developing, but it is in its infancy.
Hey, Mr Dunn?
To your question you asked before, I think similar to Sally, there's representatives on the board, but the representatives of community councils are not there as individuals as such. So similar to what in the Gyle and Butte position.
Thank you. John Wilson, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Can I just expand on some of the answers that have been given so far? And I'll concentrate on the first question in terms of participation at local government elections. And I was glad to hear that Fife and Argyll and Butte indicated that it was in the upper 40s % the turnout for elections, and Edinburgh roughly 40%. Now that national average in the last 2012 local government elections was 39%. Can I ask what is being done to target the areas in each of your authorities where the turnout is lowest? And particularly, Mr Dunn, could you give examples of the turnout in Craigmillar, Pilton, Wester Hales? Likewise, in Fife, are there examples of some of the former mining communities in Fife where the turnout might be low? And similarly with Argyll and Butte, where are there pockets that we have that do not tend to participate in the electoral system? Because interestingly, the Scottish Local Government Boundary Commission has produced a report, a consultation report, that says that they think there should be increased elected members representing areas where there have been identified on the basis of the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. What type of impact would that have, as well as what work is being done to engage with those difficult to engage with electorate?
Mr Grimmond, will we start with you, please?
Yeah, okay. I think undoubtedly in Fife there is maybe not a direct correlation, but there is some correlation between those areas of most significant multiple deprivation and low turnout in recent elections. Our approach to that is, I think, embedded within a broader approach to community engagement and community capacity building. So there's a recognition within the authority that we seek to target support in terms of enabling and encouraging the local communities to articulate their views and engage with the process of the council and target that resource at those areas with greatest need. But that's a more general approach to community capacity building and community engagement rather than an approach that's directly linked to voter turnout at elections. But it's that broader based approach that we would take at the moment.
Thank you. We've got a similar approach in terms of community capacity building. In terms of participation in elections, then we do some focus work, particularly in relation to young people, through schools, to try and engage young people in elections. Our lowest turnout area in the last local government elections was Dunoon at just over 41%. Our highest area was Kintyre and Isles at 50.6%. So there's a range, but all of it above the national average. In terms of the Local Government Boundary Commission, we recently had the chair out to speak to some of our members, and we just put the submission in to the Boundary Commission, Argyll and Bute would be looking at a reduction of 3 elected members, and the case that's been put back from the Council is particularly around 2 main aspects. One is the geographic spread that some of our ward members have to cover, with the number of groups and expectations of members attending these groups. Like one ward has got 13 community councils in it and covers a vast geographic area. The other issue that has been raised with the Commission is that the expectation of communities and how they engage with the local elected members is different from some other areas. Our local elected members, it's their home addresses that are on the council website. They regularly have people contacting them at home. They regularly have people turning up at their home. So that's the level of engagement that communities expect, or the electorate expect, with our elected members, which then has an impact in terms of their capacity.
Mr Dunn?
One area that we have looked at in recent years is the number of postal votes is actually increasing quite substantially in the past number of years. So that's an area we have looked at. What I'd like to do is probably take your question away. It's not an area I'm directly linked to, so I'm happy to take the question away and provide a response within the next week.
That would be
grand.
grand.
To the electoral person who deals with this on a day-to-day, just to get further details.
Thank you, Mr Dunn. John Wilson?
Mr. Grimmett.
Just one. I was conscious I didn't specifically answer the question in relation to the local government boundary commission and the assertion of a weighting to deprivation in relation to number of elected members. And I think when we began to look at that in Fife, I think first of all, I think as Sally was indicating, we wouldn't necessarily take the view that there's a direct correlation between elected member workload and deprivation. There are a number of other factors which would influence elected member workload. And also, curiously, while the Local Government Boundary Commission have indicated a weighting to deprivation in defining numbers of elected members at an authority-wide level, that's not going to be replicated when the second stage of the exercise to determine individual wards will be defined. So there's an element of inconsistency in the rationale, which would see in Fife a standardisation of the number of electors for each elected member, which would have no reflection of inequalities.
I welcome the comments, particularly the issues in regarding the Scottish Local Government Boundary Commission's review that's taking place, because I think it's important when we're talking about accountability and autonomy of public bodies, then there has to be a directly linked electoral accountability, and that's something we need to look at. In relation to the witnesses indicated that there was some consultation on the budget setting process. Could you give an indication of when exactly you put out to consultation to communities or to your community planning partnerships, or whatever process you use prior to the budget being finally set, usually in February of each year?
Mr Dunn, you said you started the process in September with communities, is that right?
That's correct. What we do is we have a budget that goes to budget proposals. It goes to the Finance and Resources Committee, usually towards the end of September, and that then signals the start of the budget consultation process. What happens there is various leaflets are produced, information goes on the internet, emails are sent to groups who we have contact addresses to, asking for questions, etc., queries and responses. We then go around the city to the various kind of ward areas and have meetings at night, and the public can attend these things, ask questions. There's usually presentations done on the budget, just setting out the general thrust of the financial position of the council. Setting out the scene, this is proposals, we welcome you to come back by Christmas. We will then look at these proposals, provide a response back to you, and the idea would be to get a budget drafted by the administration towards the end of January, so that can then be debated and approved by council, usually in the second week of February.
In terms of the meetings, Is that council officers and elected members, or just council officers that are attending those meetings?
At these meetings, it's usually the council officers and the local members, plus probably the finance convener or vice convener, usually attend these meetings. So I think what we need to say is that the attendance at these meetings can be mixed, and that's why we need to look at other means and modes to communicate with the stakeholders as well. And maybe another thing that I should have said earlier is that we also webcam meetings of the council now to try to increase consultation with the public, and our scrutiny committee is also webcammed now as well, just to try to get community involvement. But that's our budget process. As I say, we're looking at other means of taking it to other members of the public, be it schools, etc., or older people, just how we actually do that and get the information to them.
Mr Grimmond.
The process in Fife commences probably the back end of the summer with a fairly broad-based consultation using, again, a variety of channels, which at that stage would seek to engage with communities both directly through public meetings, online engagement and feedback, opportunities to vote on different options and priorities. And the intention at that stage is to share as much information as possible around the range of choices that the local authority has to make in relation to coming to a final budget, and doing that both thematically, so looking at within, say, education or within local service delivery, and seeking views, but also doing that on the basis of looking at the range of services provided and some of the choices that need to be made. And that's as much about trying to gather information into the authority over that period from roughly August through to October. And so that's a first wave of consultation and engagement. The administration in Fife has then brought together that information and published a draft budget in November for a second round of consultation, again public face-to-face consultation online, and gathered a range of feedback on that draft budget proposition, which is then refined on the basis of that feedback for a final budget to be presented in February.
Leiden?
Yeah, the budget consultation process over the years has started at different periods, and it would start typically somewhere between October and the end of November. We do all the things that Steve and Hugh have outlined, but in addition we do web chats with the leader of the council, which the first time we did it was really successful. It didn't have as many participants in this year's budget consultation exercise, so we're having a look at that. The other thing in addition that we do is a budget simulator that we put online, so individuals can move around how much they think should be spent on different services of the council, and if nothing else, it actually shows, and the feedback that we've got from people is that it shows what a difficult exercise it is in setting a budget. We also put out a communication after the budget has been set on what you've told us and what we did about it, so there's that feedback loop in terms of the consultation. And in relation to your question about who attends these meetings, as I said earlier, it's community planning partners as well as council officers, and the leader or the deputy leader of the council usually attends these meetings as well.
John Wilson.
One of the main issues that we've been presented with, mainly by local authorities, is in terms of the spending discretions that local authorities have and the lack of powers to raise your own finance. There's been some complaints made about particularly, say, the freezing council tax and the settlement that's been made over the last 7 years. Does the issue about where the money comes from in terms of how the council spends it, is that reflected in the discussions and debates with the public in each of your authorities? Or is it just a case of they look at the budgets, the overall budget, rather than saying, well, I think the local authority should raise more of its own finances, or it should spend the money that it gets from the various sources that the funding comes from in a different way?
Mr Dunn.
I think in the meetings we have, people generally look at the quantum, the total amount of cash. But I would say that in the recent round, there were some questions about, what was the cumulative effect of a council tax freeze? What would it have been extra money it could have been generated through that? But I think when you're dealing with public, they are not looking at how much it comes from government grant, how much comes from, it used to be non-domestic rates, how much comes from council tax. I think they're just looking at the quantum, because generally what we show is here's the total resources that we're getting, this is the total resources the council has. But I think in the last round there were some questions being asked, just what was the cumulative effect of the council tax freeze over a period of time, and what was the total level of resource that might have provided.
Just out of curiosity, Mr Dunn, could you indicate who were expressing those views?
It was just an odd comment. It came in through the consultation, and there was the odd just kind of question as to what was the cumulative effect of the council tax freeze. But it was just an odd question because, as I said earlier, people tend to look at the quantum of the source. In Edinburgh, they look at the quantum of the source of being almost £900 million. So the way we look at the budget is that is the resources. We don't tend to split it down into government grant, council tax, non-domestic rates as it used to be, which is now part of the revenue support grant. So it was just an odd question, just got asked on that. But generally, people are looking at the quantum of the sources and also the quantum of the sources likely to be available going forward.
Mr Grimmond?
I think in terms of the consultation that we've undertaken on our budget setting, given the limited flexibility to raise additional income or to and I suppose compounded by the effect of the council tax freeze, in that there isn't really been a debate locally around the merits or demerits of raising taxation through that route. The consultation has tended to focus on a fixed envelope of resource and really focus the discussion on choices to be made within that. So given that, I wouldn't suggest that there's been a significant public raising of the issue, although it's certainly true that in some of the specific face-to-face consultations that we've had, the responses around making choices about investment has raised the issue of, well, we would prefer there to be more resource to apply to those priorities rather than make increasingly difficult choices across them. And I think that suggests that there's a desire for that broader, a fuller debate that is looking both at the resources that are raised locally and then how they're applied. And the budget process at the moment doesn't really allow that because the resources raised are limited locally.
Supplementary from Mark MacDonald there.
Yeah, I'm just interested, Convener, because there's much talk around limitations on councils to raise finance, and it seems to be being viewed entirely through the prism of locally based taxation. But of course, local authorities do apply a range of charges, be that universal charges for parking services or specialised services such as social care packages, things like that. So there are means beyond local taxation through which local authorities generate income presently.
I think that is true, and in Edinburgh what we're doing just now is doing a comprehensive charging policy for our services, setting out the general principles, because it's something we didn't really have in the whole before. So what we're setting out is a charging policy which is going to go to a subcommittee this month, and that's just setting out the kind of general principles. But you are correct that there is certain services that we do charge fees for.
I think that's true. That I think in Fife, 13% of is generated through income and fees, so it's still a relatively small proportion of the resource that's available locally, but within that, that certainly is part of the consultation exercise. There are some levers that can be pulled in relation to that.
A wee supplementary there from Anne McTaggart.
Thanks, Convener. Is there any other tax that you can think of, or any other supplement? I mean, we mentioned there about some of the charges and stuff that you would like to have the power over, that you currently have the power over. Is there any other ones? I'm thinking about perhaps tourism.
Mr Dunn, there was a proposal from Edinburgh a while back.
I was just going to mention that we had the proposal on a bedroom tax for hotels.
That throws up other connotations when the words bedroom tax come into play, Mr Dunn.
That's why I called it tourism.
Yeah, tourism tax, basically a levy on hotel rooms
Right.
in the city to, and I think that there's a debate over. We spend a lot of money on things like the Hogmanay and the benefits that does to the city. Should the city then get some benefit back from the payments it's made through a tax on hotel rooms, if I can call it that?
Yeah.
Does
And
that.
also the Argyll and Butte.
Ms Loudon?
Have you thought about that, or have you thought about any other means of taxation that would be of benefit?
Yeah, I think we put in our submission, well, we did put in our submission that anything we would need to look at the costs and benefits of any proposed increase in powers in terms of taxation, because it may act as a disincentive in some of our tourism areas, where you know, if you've got a very buoyant tourism area, then it may be fine, but in some of our areas the tourism can be quite fragile. So we would need to make sure that either if it was applied across the board it didn't act as a disincentive, or we may choose to apply it in certain areas and not in other areas.
Okay. Before I bring in Stuart McMillan, I want to stay on this topic. Going elsewhere, there is often the ability for local authorities to establish their own companies. Do you think that there should be some flexibility in terms of local authorities being able to do so? An example is it's only in recent times that we've seen the ability for local authorities to look at energy generation, electricity generation. Would it help you guys if you were able to establish your own companies and plough money back into public services? Mr Dunn, do you want to go first?
Edinburgh Council currently does have council companies, arm's lengths, external companies and things like EDI, who did property development. We do have companies like Edinburgh International Conference Centre as well, so we do have a range of companies. I think the key thing in setting up a company is to have a robust business case as to the reasons why you're setting it up, what are the objectives you're trying to do, and also putting in proper governance arrangements to show that the council has got control over what's happening. So it's a possibility that we're willing to look at, and councils across Scotland have set up various arm's length arrangements over recent years. Sometimes the motivation might have been financial savings in non-domestic rates, but that shouldn't just be the only reason you're doing it. It should be a robust business case as to why you're trying to do it and what your objectives are.
Do any of the companies that you currently have make any profit? I mean, I'm well aware that exhibition centres don't make profit.
Some of the companies have made profits. The downturn in property did affect our property companies, but they're now coming through that, and there's signs of recovery happening there. That we do own 91% of Roving Buses, which is a very profitable company, and we got £3 million dividend to the council in the last financial year.
You're lucky guys in that regard, but we won't move on to buses. Mr Grimmond, please.
Similarly, I think we've got a reasonable degree of flexibility in our ability to set up, and we have set up both arm's length companies and joint venture vehicles to both develop and generate income. Our most recent arm's length vehicle is in the area of waste management and energy generation, and over time we would hope to anticipate that would generate income that would come back to the local authority for reinvestment.
I think it would be very interesting if we could get more detail on that endeavour, because some members experienced similar when we were in Malmo. In Sweden. Ms Loudon.
Yeah, I mean, one area where I think it would be useful is at present, if the council wants to invest in a company through shares and loans, then we can't do that through borrowing because it's not treated as a capital asset. And I think if that was opened to local authorities, that would be extremely helpful, particularly in investing in regeneration and economic recovery.
Thank you very much. Stuart McMillan, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel. Just a few questions regarding some of the things that have been said so far this morning. But actually, just another one just kind of sprang to mind on the back of the last question regarding the arm's length companies. Bearing in mind that there is going back to earlier comments regarding the turnout at elections, and the turnout's around about 40% or late 40%. And sometimes kind of the public scepticism in terms of what politicians do and what public authorities do. Do you think that with the increasing number of arm's length companies actually taking place across the country, that when a member of the public goes to speak to a councillor and on a particular issue, the councillor, they turn around and say, well, actually, that's no longer under the control of the local authority, that's an arm's length company. That then takes away the level of democratisation, and as a consequence, the public might feel as if their elected members don't actually have a chance to make a difference or make a change for that particular constituent.
Just going to take that first, Ms Loudon.
I think refer it to the two areas we've got arm's length organisations.
You keep it straight, Ms Loudon. Mr Grimmond.
I think there is an issue in there. In Fife, we have predominantly set up arm's length trusts, which are significantly supported by the local authorities, so that they're not profit generating. They're generally income sapping. And we've wrestled with the issue of having the benefits of almost single-focused trusts that can focus on the area of activity, whether it's sport or culture, while ensuring that there is a degree of continued kind of democratic oversight of that. And I think we've achieved that both through the way in which those trusts are managed through boards, but also through the financial support from the local authority. So my view is that we have not got into a situation where the local authority has ceased to have any control over or influence over those trust areas, and therefore there is still a line back to democratic accountability for those areas of service. And the arm's length company that we've set up is similarly still has a link back to the local authorities. So we'd seek to assert that when questions are asked about those areas of activity, there is still a responsibility for the local authority to take responsibility for that and to be able to answer to it.
Sir Dan.
I agree with what Steve says. As I said in my answer previously, I think it's about governance arrangements here as well, to make sure you've got strong governance arrangements, and if you're given funding, that should be shown in your service level agreement or whatever agreement you have with that organisation as to what you expect for the money you're putting in and what you hold as to be the key outcomes from that body outside organisation. As I say, there will still be the link with elected members, but I do see also that when you're on the board of a company, you have to act in the best interest of that company at that times, so there can be that conflict at times as well. But I think it goes back to your governance and how you give that money through your service level agreement or contract, that you're clearly set in what you expect to get for that money that you're putting in there.
Sir Macmillan.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I mean, I appreciate that also there'll be different methods and different models around the country, and so I accept that you couldn't answer for any other local authority area, but your answers have been helpful so far. Just on another couple of areas. Earlier on, Mr Dunn, you mentioned about the Edinburgh process for the budget, also starting in September. That particular process that you have, when did that start? When did you introduce that particular budgetary process?
The budget process kind of evolved. Last year we went out in September, and that's the areas we've done it.
So was that the first year?
That was the first year we'd managed to get it out in September. The year previous we'd got it out in mid-November. And what we found with that, although that was an improvement of what we'd done before, was mid-November is not ideal because a lot of the community groups don't hold meetings in December with Christmas coming up and different things happening. So even though we'd got it out and we thought 6 weeks consultation before Christmas was good, we found out a lot of people were coming back saying we don't actually hold our meetings in December because there's other things happening with children, etc. at that time of year. So that's why this year we got it out in September. We feel that was very successful, and what we're trying to do is repeat that again this year. And so our budget consultation as officers is actually starting now. We are actually looking at that now to be able to get kind of options proposals to members of the administration before the summer. and then the idea was for them to have a look at that and then see what proposals, develop them and put them out in September.
Mr McMillan.
So it's fair to, it's a recent initiative then?
It's very...
Okay, thank you. Mr Grimmond, you mentioned in terms of Fife at the second phase of the public consultation, that takes place online. Now, not everyone does have access to the internet. Not everyone actually wants to do things online. So how would you then actually have discussions with people not online?
Yeah. Sorry, I either misrepresented the situation. What I intended to say was that the second phase, i.e. the kind of draft administration budget, is consulted both face-to-face through a number of public meetings as well as online information. So it's, again, it's multiple channels rather than, than one.
Okay. That clarifies that. Thank you. And the final kind of question is regarding the issue of resources and the quantum of resources. Obviously, I heard what was said earlier, and I think one of the phrases was the limited flexibility of local authorities to raise taxation. Now, a few months ago, I attended an event, and there was someone who worked for a local authority was there. And they said, well, can you get your government to give my council more money, please? So we then had a discussion, and I posed a question to the individual. I said, well, you're an employee of that particular authority. Do you still see any waste taking place in the department in which you're working? And the individual's response was, oh yes, it's going on all the time. I said, so on the one hand, you're asking me to ask the government to give your council more money, but you're still seeing waste. So I find that the whole issue of resources quite a kind of polarised debate, because we're in economic times whereby authorities, all public authorities, need to be more efficient and need to ensure that there is less waste taking place, and also mean there is less money around. Certainly, that the Scottish Government have to allocate to all public bodies. So do you think that's a fair assumption? And in terms of your authorities, do you still do you accept that there is still waste that's taking place within your authorities, and that certainly needs to be worked on to be reduced and hopefully eradicated?
I think very brief answers here, please, Mr Dunn.
Looking at the budget going forward, I think one of the big issues is the demography issue. That's putting pressures on councils going forward, so that is an ongoing pressure each year. Regarding an area looking at the budget is, as a council, we want to drive as much efficiency out as we can. There's probably always more efficiencies you can drive out, but that's what we're keen to do, because we don't want to reduce services or even stop services. So the drive in the council is to drive out as much efficiencies that we can from the council by new ways of doing it, taking out duplication, taking out layers of staffing layers, etc. So that's what game for that. That's what we're trying to do as much as possible. There's always efficiencies you can deliver, and that's what we're trying to drive out.
Mr Grimmond.
I think there's no doubt that demand is rising and resources are declining. In Fife, our calculation of that is that over a 4-year period there is a £92 million gap between demand rising and resources diminishing if we were to continue to do things exactly as we do them now. The approach to that, picking up this specific point, is, yeah, a recognition that it is reasonable for us to expect to deliver continuous improvement and ongoing efficiency. So an element of that gap should be addressed through an efficiency target within the authority, and we would believe that can deliver part of that answer. However, it's unlikely that can deliver the whole answer in terms of that gap, and part of that needs to be addressed through either issues around the quantum of resources available or transforming the way in which services are delivered to deliver within the quantum that is available. Ms Loudon, please.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo the comments that Mr Grimmond said there. Just a couple of things to add in terms of context. Between 2010 to 2013, we were facing significant reductions in budget, and over that period, out of each of the services, we took out either 10% or 15%, the vast majority of the overall budgets. The vast majority of those were done in efficiency savings, and performance levels have remained the same or have improved. We've got an ongoing budget issue of around £40 million over the next 5 years, and again, some of that can be done by continuing to be more efficient, continuing to improve how we deliver services, but again, not all of it will be delivered by that. There's a point where actually you can take efficiencies out, but there are fewer and fewer efficiencies to be achieved whilst you've still got an increasing population, or a decrease in population, I beg your pardon, for Argyll and Bute, which in turn means that GEE reduces, our funding reduces, and there's potential for a downward spiral.
Okay, thank you. Mark MacDonald, please.
Thank you, Convener. As the panel might be aware, that a number of the committee went on a fact-finding visit to a number of European authorities. And one of the interesting things that we looked at there was the number of local authorities, or municipalities as they're referred to, versus what exists here in Scotland currently. And I note that, for example, we have before us a city authority in Edinburgh. We have a rural authority, predominantly rural authority in Fife, which has a number of towns within it, but it's spread over quite a large area. And we have a rural authority with island communities in Argyll and Bute. Are Scotland's local authorities the right size?
Ms Loudon.
Thanks. I mean, the evidence is in the Commission and Local Democracies document of showing the number of local authorities across European countries, and how we sit out, particularly in Scotland, as having fewer local authorities per head of population. I think there's one country where if the local authority area was the size of Argyll and Bute, there would be 7 or 8 different local authorities within that. And that the evidence then is to say that that's a good thing, shows that the local turnout is greater in these other countries than there are in Scotland. I'm not fudging the question, but I think there is a huge amount of evidence within the Commission's interim report which would give you your answers rather than a professional view coming forward.
Let's rephrase the question slightly then, Convener. Are there challenges that are faced by the scale of the local authority that you serve in?
The geographic spread is a huge challenge in terms of Argyll and Bute. As I said earlier, we've got 4 administrative areas. It's the overall strategic organisation split into 4 administrative areas. But we've got 23 inhabited islands, and we've got 3 peninsulas. And each of these areas is very different in nature. And the solutions in terms of service delivery, in terms of economic regeneration, are different in each of those areas. One could conclude that that would mean having more local authorities would help in that regard, but there would still need to be a mechanism for dealing with some of the more strategic issues that an area like Argyll and Bute faces.
Mr Grimmond.
Briefly, I think the international comparisons that are being identified both through your committee and work elsewhere are illuminating, I think, in terms of enabling a debate to take place. I think the solution to that, there's a variety of solutions to that. So in Fife, without answering the question about whether there should be more or less local authorities, we recognise that to enable us to be responsive to the communities in Fife, we need to set up a mechanism, which is the 7-area committee mechanism that we've set up, to enable more localised engagement, because that can be done at the scale of an authority that's attempting to engage with over 300,000 citizens. So there are different solutions that can be done within the current envelope. Equally, there's other solutions that could be brought forward, but I wouldn't want to speculate on them.
Mr Dunn.
I don't think I really can add much. There's a lot of the research out there, and I think you can look at that and make your decisions on the services that you want councils and that to provide as to what is the appropriate size to deliver that. Edinburgh is quite a compact city. Previously before that I worked for Lothian Legion, which was had Mid Lothian, East Lothian, West Lothian, so I think there is a lot of research out there, and it's for people to go away and look at that and come back.
Can we be very brief now, Mr MacDonald? I'm aware we're coming up for an hour of this. I don't want to keep these folks here all morning.
I appreciate that, Convener. I'll skip the question around powers because I think we've dealt with that somewhat. I just wanted to touch again on the public involvement issue. You've spoken about how you attempt to engage with the public on issues like the budget. To what extent do you see people who are not what you would describe as the usual suspects getting involved? And is there a means by which the public can see demonstration that their involvement has actually had an impact? Because obviously it's fine to involve the public, but if they don't see that their involvement has any impact on the proposals that have come forward, they can become very quickly disillusioned and disenchanted.
Ms Loudon?
I think in terms of a couple of examples is what we do with the harder to reach groups. So it isn't just the usual suspects, but there is undoubtedly an issue in terms of a lot of consultations where it is the usual suspects that you see coming forward. So we do try to put in other mechanisms to try and reach other people. And I think the example that I gave in terms of the Integrated Children's Services Plan, where it was from very young children in nurseries all the way up to their parents and other service users, is an attempt to try and get beyond the usual suspects. And it tends to be if you set up a community event or a roadshow event, then it's the usual suspects that will come along. So all the other mechanisms that we put in place, like the web chats, like the surveys, like social media, etc., that's all an attempt to try and get as large a range of responses to a consultation, as well as the ongoing engagement that we have with service users in relation to normal service delivery.
Mr Grimmond?
Probably just two things to add to that. I think in terms of the, it's about using multiple channels. So I think that there is a risk in, I suppose, the more traditional channels of public meetings that they might tend to be populated by usual suspects, although that isn't always the case. I think as we diversify the ways in which we try to reach people, whether that is online, whether it's increasingly using social media and other means, by those mechanisms, the communities that are more likely to utilise those routes are broader. So I think we'll find that is a way beyond that. I think the other thing is it depends on the issue and that we're talking about. I think some of the consultations that we've undertaken most recently around the school estate in Fife, there's a very strong sense that you've reached pretty deeply into communities in terms of both getting general views back and then more specifically. So I think it depends on the issue as well.
Mr Dunn.
I think, no, as part of the budget consultation exercise, at the end of it, we've always been keen to go back and say these are the changes and the proposals that came forward. Like say last year, and for the current financial year 14-15, we had the proposal to cut the number of additional police officers we had. That went out for consultation. That got changed. There was also proposals to do with additional support needs. These proposals got changed. The year before that, we had our proposal, you might have heard of Edinburgh Guarantee. It was 1 year funding, and we mainstreamed that funding because of the information we got back from the respondents. So that shows that by engaging, you did change it, and we're very keen to show people, because that shows that by engaging in future, you might change these proposals. Regarding usual suspects, I think it depends on the proposals you get out there. We do, depending on where the proposals, the options are, sometimes get new groups, but I think it's an area that I said before, we're keen to develop this to get to a wider community as well, be it younger people, be it older people, be it groups we don't get to. So that is basically work in progress, and very keen to look at that. We are looking at how other councils are trying to get more involvement in the budget process.
Alec Crowley, please.
To come back to the first question that came up around voting, and does the local authorities have any information available looking at the census and the population of the local authority area, the numbers of people that are not registered to vote, and is there a correlation, or is there any information between people that don't vote, people that are not registered to vote, and high areas of deprivation? I think John was touched on that question previously, and I say that from a point of view of somebody who campaigning on doorsteps, going up and down streets, particularly in areas that would be described as areas of higher deprivation, and house after house after house not actually on the electoral register. So is there work that's been done about that? Is there work that's been done around that area?
Ms Loudon first, please. I think, this is a complex question. It may well be that you may wish to submit further evidence in that regard and what the valuation boards are doing as well, if your area is covered by a valuation board. But Ms Loudon?
Yeah, I'd appreciate if we could submit some information back to the committee on that, because it is fairly complex.
Mr Grimmond?
Likewise, if that's acceptable.
Mr Dunn?
There has been work done with the assessor, but I'm happy to take that.
I had a funny feeling that that would be the case, but I really do think that that would be extremely useful for the committee if we could get that information that Mr Rowley's requested.
So, Convener, and I think perhaps once we've got that, we can, as a committee, look at whether there's more work that needs to be done in that area. Because if we are serious in looking at this issue, then the correlation between deprivation. Can I then come on to, we talked about demographics and some of the big issues that are facing local government, and there's no doubt that there are major challenges there. One of the questions that's been looked at is whether local authorities should have more autonomy in their own right. I mean, to do comparisons with Europe, and I wasn't one of the people that was on the European fact-finding exercise, but it is a fact that most local authorities in Europe have much more autonomy and powers and ability to raise finances themselves. Is that something that Scottish local government would see as a natural progression forward? We're very caught up in a referendum just now in a debate about Scotland's future, but where does local government sit within that, and how does local government articulate those views?
Mr Dunn first, please.
I think there's a debate to be had there as to the role of the services that local government should provide. I think some of the submissions you received from I think Glasgow Council leading that touches on these areas in their submissions. I think there's areas that are covered quite widely in submissions that you've received on these matters.
Let me play devil's advocate here, because Mr Rowley has pointed out the European situation. In Denmark, for example, local authorities at various levels are dealing with health in terms of the county level. The municipalities are dealing with social security issues. Do you think it would create a more joined-up approach if you were to have these powers? Mr Dunn? You're looking to your colleagues from Solace.
Yes, I'm looking to my Solace colleagues. Well, things like health is going to be integrated going forward with health and social work. The services are integrated from April next year, so that's starting to happen there. So hopefully there'll be synergies there that we can deliver and free up sources for frontline services. But
Mr Grimmond?
Yeah, I think if you step back from this and looking at the international evidence, without a doubt, I think there is an argument for a stronger link, looking at the fiscal autonomy between the resources that are raised locally and the resources that are deployed locally. That would seem to be a strong line. I think there's a second line which is about, for me, around localism and around, we've talked significantly about engagement of local communities in decisions which affect them. I think the notion that those services should be governed and managed locally, and local government has been a positive vehicle for that, seems to be a strong theme. And that sits against a backdrop over time, against some of the evidence that you've gathered and has been gathered through the commission that Kozlov set up, suggests that over a long trajectory there's been a degree of drift towards a centralism and certain roles being removed from local government. So I think to turn the tide on that and see a move towards localism would suggest that there may be a range of things that could be more intelligently delivered at a more local level by local authorities.
Ms Loudon?
I think Mr Grimmond's answered the question.
Mr Rowley?
That's fine, thanks.
Okay, Cameron Buchanan, please.
Thank you very much, Convener. I noticed that in Scotland you only account for 10.7% of your revenue for local taxation, and the UK average is 12.7%. In Scandinavia and Holland, health boards, or their equivalent, are in the control of local authorities, and would you wish to see this control in your own area in order to increase your revenue streams?
Quick answers to that, Ms Loudon?
I think there's, and again I'm not ducking the question, but I think there's a lot of evidence in the Commission's interim report which will help the committee in terms of their deliberations.
What evidence from the Commission's interim report do you think will help us as a committee?
In terms of looking at place and in terms of looking at local fiscal powers and local accountability. Can I add to that in terms of the 3 island councils, and I know you're going to visit them, in terms of looking at the single public authority? It was something that Argyll and Bute Council did look at and to see whether that would bring advantages, but the environment wasn't correct at that time to continue the debate, and we'll certainly be watching that debate with interest because there are many aspects of Argyll and Bute Council that are very similar to the 3 island authorities.
That's one of the reasons why you're here today, Ms Loudon, and why you've been specifically asked about your islands. Mr Grimmond.
I think that moves into interesting territory. I think health and social care integration moves us into that territory because the creation of integrated boards can either be viewed as, for the first time, elements of health and social care coming into an arena where there is a greater degree of democratic accountability through local government in relation to that area, or it could be viewed as a drift away from that direct accountability into a different vehicle which is slightly at arm's length from both health and from local government. I think the process of developing health and social care integration begins to raise those wider questions about the governance of the wider public services in Scotland, not just health and local government, but more broadly.
A wee supplementary from Anne McTaggart.
Just a wee reminder that whilst we were over doing the fact-finding, it concerns me somewhat that we're not really concerned about the participation rates and the turnout in the elections. They had 70% turnout over there, and we're maybe 40, maybe not 40 at times. You know, that's nearly double. And I'm not saying that's all your fault. However, you know, I think we all should be concerned about that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Cameron?
Sorry, just going to ask you a quick supplementary. You didn't actually answer the question. Do you actually think that the Health Board should be under control of Fife Council, for example?
Mr Grimmond?
I answered it as far as I'm prepared to answer it.
Yes, thank you. All right, thank you.
A Chief Executive's diplomatic answer. John Wilson.
Just to take that accountability issue, take it a step further, one of your colleagues, East Lothian, in their submission made the comment that local accountability can only be achieved when you have greater control of your own budget raising or finance raising. Do you think that's true?
Who wants to go first? Mr Dunn, the finance man.
I can understand what they're saying. It's this about of what you collect locally, going on the services and showing a link to the council tax and whatever is collected locally. So I can see the point they're trying to make.
Mr Grimmond?
Yeah, I think there's a direct relationship between the income that's raised locally and then deployed locally, and if moving towards that would seem to be a good thing.
Ms Loudon.
Yeah, from community consultations that we've undertaken, there is usually someone who raises the issue about how much money is raised locally, and there's a misconception that council tax is the full amount of funding that's available to a local authority, and they're surprised when it's explained to people the percentage that covers in terms of our overall funding.
I want to remain in that just for a wee second, because we had interesting discussions in Denmark, and the overall total that's raised locally is a standard amount, and local authorities have to negotiate amongst themselves whether they want to raise or lower their own local income tax. It seems that these debates work and that agreement is reached. How easy do you think that would be in Scotland at this moment in time, given the difficulties we've just seen recently at COSLA in terms of dealing with the changes to the formula round about the census? Ms Loudon?
I think some of these questions are quite political questions, and I think that's why we're all being...
As chief executives, how easy do you think it would be to have that discussion and come to agreement at Solace rather than at COSLA then?
we can certainly have that debate and discussion at Solace, and we can certainly come forward with a professional view from Solace, but it does go back to the politicians at COSLA who will need to make the decisions on things. The debate up to now in COSLA has been around the use of the distribution formula, whereas I think some of the evidence that's coming forward to the committee is around local government finance, which is much wider than just the distribution formula. And I suspect that's where you want to put your focus of attention on.
I think, you know, in terms of the Danish situation, where there is still that top-line figure, there's still negotiation which goes on. So, I mean, we can talk about distribution formula, we can talk about other things, but there is this negotiation which we don't seem to do particularly well on here. Do you think it would be easy to get Solace to come up with the professional advice to give to the politicians in terms of that negotiation?
I think Solace could have a view as a professional body, but the Directors of Finance would have a view as a professional body as well, and the COSLA officers would be there to give professional advice to the wider COSLA membership. Okay.
Mr Grimmond.
I think there's two parts to your question. One was around that if there is always likely to be an element of national distribution and then local flexibility.
I think this is not national distribution. The national distribution is somewhat different. This is where there's a top line set in terms of the amount of money that local authorities in Denmark can raise themselves. There is then a negotiation between the municipalities, because some may want to raise their local taxation, but in order for them to do so, somebody else has to agree to lower their taxation, or vice versa, so that the top line figure remains the same.
Right, I find it difficult to answer that question.
Okay, Mr Dunn, do you have a view?
I think I'd want to study the model before I could comment.
Right, okay, fair play to you. It was always worth a try. Ms Lowden, in terms of the Argyll and Butte evidence, you stated that local authorities need to be empowered to make local government meaningful to communities. In terms of that empowerment, what do you mean? And are you thinking about a constitutional place for local government, as it has in the likes of Denmark, Sweden, Germany?
Yeah, I mean, the council's not taken a position, or doesn't have a position in terms of a constitutional commitment. But it is COSLA's position that there should be a constitutional position for local government. The main issue for us in Argyll and Butte is to have all the levers that we can possibly have at our disposal to increase the population and improve the economy, and any powers that can be given to local government to allow that to happen would be welcomed by the local authority.
But what one hand giveth, the other hand can take away at any point, unless you've got that constitutional position.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mr Grimmond?
Yeah, I think there's a little to add to Sally's answer, really, that I think a stronger constitutional base for local government would provide a stronger ongoing basis going forward.
Thank you. And Mr Dunn? Okay, can I thank you very much for your evidence today, and I suspend the meeting and we move into private session. Thank you.